Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to take you on a bit of a journey into the fascinating world of your own mind.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, we're going to explore the landscape of the unconscious and how it shapes our thoughts and feelings, and even like all our interactions with other people.
I love it.
Yeah, and our guide for this adventure is Alessandra Lemma's book, Introduction to the Practice of Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy.
Oh, yeah, great book.
Have you read it?
I have. Yeah, it's a really good one.
It's really good.
Yeah, it really demystifies this whole field, you know? We'll be uncovering how unconscious communication plays out and how our past relationships, continue to influence us even in the present.
Right.
And ultimately how therapy can kind of help us break free from some of those patterns that might be holding us back.
Yeah, I love that. And, I have to admit, when I hear the word unconscious, I think Freud likes cigars and those old couches. But Lemma makes it really clear that this isn't just some dusty old theory. Like, even neuroscience is on board with the idea that a lot of what's happening is happening beneath the surface.
It's true. Yeah, it's not just a concept anymore. It's something we can actually see in brain imaging studies these days, which I think is really cool.
That is cool.
And understanding these hidden forces is really key to unlocking, I think, the mysteries of why we do the things we do and feel the way we feel.
Right.
And we're talking about thoughts, feelings, fantasies that we're not directly aware of, but they're constantly influencing our choices and our relationships with people.
So it's like there's this whole other world that's operating within us that we don't have access to.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of spooky.
Right. A little bit, yeah.
But also super intriguing.
Yeah.
So if we're not aware of these things, how do they actually show up in our lives?
That's where things get really fascinating, I think. Lemma talks about unconscious communication, those subtle messages that we're sending all the time through our body language, our tone of voice, even, seemingly insignificant details that we share in our stories.
They got a whole secret language.
It is. It's like this hidden language that speaks volumes,
Like that story in the book about Sandra, the patient, who mentally redecorated the therapist's office during their first session.
Exactly. Yeah, she didn't come right out and say, hey, I don't like your style.
Right.
But her unconscious was saying it loud and clear.
Oh, sure.
Imagine what it would be like to walk into your therapist's office and just feel compelled to change everything about it.
Right, like rearrange all the furniture.
Totally. It suggests a need for control, maybe a discomfort with vulnerability, fear of the process itself. It's a goldmine of information for the therapist.
Wow. So even before a word is spoken, our unconscious is already making a first impression.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about rearranging the furniture, is it?
No, not at all.
Lemma connects this to how we use language, even linking it to Mary Maine's adult attachment interview.
Right. The way we tell our stories, the words we choose, even our grammar, can reveal a lot about our early attachment patterns and how we relate to others.
It's like those early experiences get embedded in how we communicate.
Yeah, exactly.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So therapy provides this space then where we can actually decode those hidden messages and finally start to understand what our unconscious is trying to tell us.
Right.
But how do we create that space, that container where all this deep work can happen?
That's where what Lemma calls the analytic frame comes in.
Okay.
Think of it as a set of guidelines, a structure that allows for that deeper exploration.
Okay.
It's not about rigidity, but about consistency boundaries, things that create a safe and predictable environment.
When I hear analytic frame, I have to admit it sounds a little stuffy to me, like putting therapy in a box.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's not about boxing anything in, though. It's about creating the conditions for something meaningful to kind of emerge.
I see.
We're talking about the therapist's neutral stance, the consistency of the meeting time, even things like fees and cancellations.
Okay.
All these elements kind of contribute to the frame.
So even the practicalities of therapy become part of this like symbolic landscape.
Absolutely. And even seemingly small deviations from the frame can sometimes tap into like powerful unconscious anxieties.
Like Tony, the patient who got so upset when the therapist was a few minutes late.
Exactly. Yeah, he had a huge reaction way out of proportion to the event itself.
Right. It was more than just being annoyed about having to wait.
Exactly. His reaction hinted at this much deeper fear of abandonment, possibly rooted in his early experiences. So the therapist, being late, even unintentionally, became this trigger for those old wounds.
So the frame is like this container that holds all those intense emotions and allows them to surface safely.
Exactly. And it allows for what Lemma calls regression, which is a kind of revisiting of those earlier emotional states so that the patient can understand them, work through them with the therapist's support, you know?
So the stage is set, right? Those unconscious forces are bubbling to the surface,
Yes.
but our minds are clever.
Oh, yeah.
They have all sorts of ways of protecting us from those uncomfortable feelings.
Right.
Enter defenses.
Ah, yes, defenses, those
Yeah.
ingenious strategies that our minds create to manage anxiety and protect us from emotional overload.
Right.
And Lemma highlights a whole range of them, from repression, where we're kind of purposefully forgetting things, to intellectualization, where we detach from our emotions and analyze them instead.
It's like we're constantly trying to outsmart our feelings.
Oh, we are, for sure.
But how do we know when those defenses are actually getting in the way rather than being helpful?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Take Paul, the compliant patient in the book.
Mm-hmm.
He agreed with everything the therapist said, never challenged anything, seemed like the perfect patient on the surface.
Right.
But there was no real depth, no emotional connection there. It was all surface level.
The surface, yeah.
Exactly. And Paul's compliance was actually this really powerful defense against facing his own feelings and engaging authentically in the process.
Well, how does a therapist even begin to work with all of this?
Well, the first step is recognizing that resistance is a natural part of therapy.
Uh-huh.
We all have this innate desire to maintain a sense of psychological balance, even if that balance is, based on kind of unhealthy patterns.
So even when we're seeking help, a part of us is also pushing back against change.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if we know it's for the best.
Yeah, it sounds paradoxical.
It does.
But understanding resistance is really key to working through it constructively. Change can feel really threatening. And those defenses that we've been talking about, they're often at the root of that resistance.
It's like we're clinging to those familiar patterns even when they're causing us pain.
Right, because at least they're familiar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But how does this all play out in the relationship between the patient and the therapist?
That's where things get really interesting, because that's where we see transference in action.
Transference, that classic psychoanalytic concept where we bring our past relationship patterns into the present.
Right.
Especially onto the therapist. Tell me more.
Mm.
So we're talking about transference, that sneaky way. Our past relationships kind of creep into our present interactions, especially in therapy.
Yeah, it's like we're projecting those old roles and dynamics onto the therapist, even if they have nothing to do with who the therapist actually is.
Right. It's like our unconscious is saying, hey, I know this dance. Let's do it again, even if it ends badly.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And therapists are trained to recognize these patterns, to see transference in action.
Right.
Like in the case of Matthew, who got really agitated when he heard noises outside the therapist's office during a session.
Right. He seemed to totally overreact, like it was a personal betrayal.
Exactly. It turned out that Matthew had a history of feeling ignored and overlooked by his family.
Okay.
And those noises outside the office, although completely unrelated to him, triggered those feelings of being unseen and unheard.
Wow. So even like insignificant events can become so charged with meaning.
They can, through the lens of transference. It's like we're constantly replaying these old scripts even when we don't realize it.
Right. But how does understanding transference actually help us change?
Well, by bringing those unconscious patterns into the light of awareness, we can start to understand how they're affecting our lives.
So it's not just about intellectual insight. It's about actually feeling those old emotions, those old hurts in the safety of the therapeutic relationship.
Precisely. It's about reliving those experiences, but this time with a different ending.
Okay.
The therapist provides a safe and containing space for those emotions to emerge and to be processed.
It's almost like we're rewriting those old stories,
Yeah.
creating new neural pathways that lead to healthier ways of relating.
That's a great way to think about it. And this brings us to this crucial question: what actually makes therapy work?
Right.
What are the mechanisms of change in this intricate dance between the patient and the therapist?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It is, yeah.
We've talked about the unconscious communication defenses, the frame transference. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot.
How does it all come together to actually create lasting change?
Well, one key element is the power of the therapeutic relationship itself.
Okay.
It's not just about the techniques, it's about the connection, the empathy, the feeling of being truly seen and understood by another person.
It makes me think about the research on infant development, how crucial those early relationships are for shaping our emotional and psychological well-being.
Yeah.
So is therapy, in a way, recreating those early experiences, providing that secure base from which we can explore our inner world?
That's a very insightful connection, and Lemma talks about this idea of emotional scaffolding,
Right.
where the therapist provides support and guidance while the patient learns to regulate their emotions and develop new coping skills.
So it's like learning to walk, but emotionally. The
Exactly.
therapist is there to kind of hold our hand as we take those first steps towards a more, secure and resilient self.
Exactly. And as we develop those new skills and capacities, we literally rewire our brains. We
Yeah.
create new neural pathways that lead to more adaptive ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving.
So therapy isn't just talk therapy, it's brain therapy.
It is.
But what are those specific ingredients that make this rewiring possible?
One important element is interpretation.
Okay.
It's about helping the patient make sense of their experiences, connect the dots between their past and present, understand the unconscious forces at play.
But it seems like timing is everything, right? Like an interpretation offered too soon or without the right relational context could fall flat or even be harmful.
You're absolutely right. It's a very delicate balance. How do we know when an interpretation is right? Well, it requires intuition, experience, and a deep understanding of the patient's unique dynamics.
It was more of an art than a science.
In a way, yes. And that's why the therapist's own self-awareness is so crucial.
Okay.
They need to be able to distinguish between their own stuff and what the patient is bringing into the room.
It's like having a built-in BS detector constantly scanning for any signs of bias or distortion.
And that's also why ongoing training and supervision are so essential for therapists.
You're right.
They need a space to process their own experiences and ensure that they're not letting their own countertransference interfere with the patient's process.
So it's a constant learning curve, even for experienced therapists.
Absolutely.
There's no magic formula,
Yeah.
no one-size-fits-all approach.
No, each therapy is this unique journey co-created by the patient and the therapist.
Okay, that all makes sense in theory. But let's bring this back down to earth for a moment.
Okay.
We've been focusing on the what of therapy, but what about the how? How do we actually know if someone is a good candidate for this type of deep, intensive work?
Right.
It's not for everyone, right?
Absolutely. Certain qualities and capacities make someone more likely to benefit from psychoanalytic psychotherapy.
Right.
It's not just about having problems. It's about having a certain mindset and a willingness to delve into those deeper layers of the self.
Like being psychologically minded, right?
Yes, that ability to reflect on oneself and consider psychological explanations for one's experiences.
Right.
It's about being curious about one's inner world and open to exploring those deeper levels of meaning.
Okay.
But there's also the question of ego strength, the ability to tolerate anxiety and manage difficult emotions without resorting to unhealthy coping mechanisms.
And we also need to consider the practical aspects.
Yes, of course.
Time, finances, commitment.
Right.
Psychoanalytic therapy can be a long-term endeavor.
It can.
And it requires a certain level of dedication from the patient.
It's a big commitment, but when it's the right fit, it can be profoundly transformative.
Right.
And the assessment process is all about figuring out whether it's the right fit for a particular individual.
So how does that assessment actually work? What kind of questions are we asking?
Well, we start by understanding the patient's perspective. What brings them to therapy? What are their goals? What are their own theories about their difficulties?
Okay.
Then we delve into their relationship history. What patterns emerge? How do they describe their relationships with significant others?
That's where Mary Main's adult attachment interview can be so helpful, right?
Absolutely. We can gain insights into the patient's early attachment experiences and how they're playing out in the present.
Right.
And then we observe the relationship that's developing between the patient and the therapist.
Mm.
What dynamics are emerging in the here and now? What's the quality of the interaction?
So it's like piecing together a puzzle, gathering information from multiple sources to get a holistic picture of the person and their potential for engaging in this type of work.
Exactly. It's a dynamic process, and it often involves, a lot of back and forth clarifying expectations and ensuring that both the patient and therapist feel comfortable moving forward.
And if they do move forward, what does that actually look like? What are the key elements of a psychoanalytic session?
Well, we've already discussed the frame, which is essential, for creating a safe and consistent environment.
Right.
But within that frame, there's a lot of room for exploration and discovery.
Okay.
The therapist encourages the patient to free associate, to say whatever comes to mind without censorship or judgment.
It's like diving into the stream of consciousness, letting the unconscious lead the way.
Yes, and the therapist listens carefully, not just to the content of what's being said, but to the underlying emotions, the patterns, the gaps, the contradictions,
Right.
they're listening for those unconscious communications we talked about earlier.
Those subtle clues,
Mm.
the body language,
Yeah.
the tone of voice, the silences.
It all reveals so much about the patient's inner world.
Yeah.
And from there, the therapist can begin to offer interpretations, helping the patient make connections and gain insight.
Okay.
But remember, interpretation isn't about providing answers or giving advice.
Right.
It's about opening up possibilities, offering new perspectives, and facilitating a deeper understanding.
And the patient isn't just a passive recipient in all of this.
Oh, no, not at all.
They're actively involved in this process of exploration and discovery.
Absolutely. The therapeutic relationship is a collaborative one.
Okay.
It's about working together to uncover those hidden patterns, those unconscious forces that are shaping the patient's experience.
It's almost like detective work, with both the patient and the therapist working together to solve the mystery of the mind.
That's a great metaphor. And sometimes the clues are subtle, the leads are dead ends, and the case takes longer to crack than we'd like.
Right.
But when we do have those breakthroughs, those moments of insight and understanding, it's incredibly rewarding. There's nothing quite like it. It's like watching a flower bloom in slow motion, witnessing the unfolding of a person's potential.
This deep dive has been truly fascinating.
I'm glad you're enjoying it.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the depth and complexity of psychoanalytic psychotherapy.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And even though it can be a long and challenging process, the rewards seem well worth the effort.
They are. It's a journey that can lead to profound insights, deeper connections, and ultimately a more fulfilling life.
Beautifully said. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground, but there's one crucial piece of the puzzle we need to explore in more depth.
Okay, what's that?
The role of the therapist. What are the qualities and skills that make for an effective psychoanalytic therapist? It's more than just sitting there and nodding right.
It is a lot more. Let's dive into the world of the therapist in the final part of our deep dive into psychoanalytic psychotherapy.
Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle that final piece of the puzzle, the therapist. What makes a good one? Is it all about being a blank slate, like just reflecting back the patient's unconscious? That always seemed a little cold to me.
It's a common misconception. While neutrality is important, it's not about being an emotionless robot.
Right.
Therapists are human beings too. They have feelings and experiences and even their own unconscious biases.
So is it more about being a really good listener? Someone who can hold space for all that, intense emotional stuff without getting overwhelmed or imposing their own agenda?
That's definitely a key ingredient. But effective therapists also need, a really deep understanding of psychoanalytic theory. They need to be able to recognize those unconscious patterns, the defenses, the transferences, and know how to work with them skillfully.
So it's like having a map of the psyche, knowing the terrain, the potential pitfalls, and the best routes to take.
Exactly. But it's not enough to just have the map. You need the skills to navigate it, And that's where empathy and intuition and emotional intelligence come into play. It's about being able to connect with the patient on a human level to create that safe and trusting space where they feel comfortable exploring their deepest fears and vulnerabilities.
So it's a balance, isn't it, between having that theoretical knowledge and that human touch?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest challenges for therapists is managing their own countertransference. Remember, countertransference is the therapist's own emotional reaction to the patient. And if they're not aware of their own stuff, it can get projected onto the patient, muddying the waters and potentially derailing the whole process.
Like having a built-in lie detector, constantly scanning for signs of bias or distortion in your own reactions.
Yeah, it takes a lot of self-awareness and reflection.
For sure.
And that's why ongoing training and supervision are so crucial for therapists. It's about having a space to process their own experiences, get feedback, and make sure that the patient's needs are always at the forefront.
So it sounds like being a psychoanalytic therapist is a pretty demanding role, requiring not just knowledge, but a deep understanding of oneself and a commitment to personal growth.
It's a constant learning process. You're never done learning and growing as a therapist.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes it so fascinating.
Right.
You're constantly being challenged to look inward, to examine your own biases and assumptions, and to find new ways to connect with your patients on a deeper level.
Now, what about the patient's role in all of this? We've talked about how the therapist needs to be a good listener, but what makes a good patient? Is it just about showing up and talking?
Well, showing up and talking is definitely a good start.
Right.
But what we're really looking for is a willingness to engage in the process.
Okay.
That means being open to exploring those deeper layers of the self, even when it's uncomfortable.
So it's about courage, too. the courage to face those parts of ourselves that we might have been avoiding, for years.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of courage to delve into the unconscious, and it also requires a certain level of trust. You trust in the process, trust in the therapist, and ultimately trust in oneself.
And building that trust takes time. It's
Yeah.
not something that happens overnight.
Exactly. That's why psychoanalytic therapy is often, a long-term endeavor.
Right.
It's not a quick fix. It's a journey of self-discovery that unfolds gradually over time.
And along that journey, there are bound to be ups and downs, moments of resistance, breakthroughs, setbacks.
That's all part of the process. It's like climbing a mountain.
Right.
There will be moments when you feel like giving up, when the path seems too steep and treacherous, but if you keep going, if you keep trusting the process, you'll eventually reach the summit and experience those breathtaking views.
That's a beautiful analogy, and I think it speaks to the transformative potential of this work.
Yeah.
It's not just about fixing problems. It's about a deeper kind of change, a shift in perspective that allows us to see ourselves and the world in a whole new light.
It's about becoming more whole, more integrated, more aligned with our true selves.
This whole conversation has really made me think about the power of the unconscious. It's like this hidden force that's shaping our lives in ways that we're not even aware of.
Right.
And therapy offers us this incredible opportunity to finally tap into that force and harness it for growth and healing.
That's a wonderful way to put it. And I think it's important to remember that, the journey of self-discovery doesn't end when therapy ends.
Right.
It's an ongoing process that we can continue to cultivate in our daily lives.
So what are some things our listeners can do to kind of keep that exploration going, even if they're not currently in therapy?
Well, one simple but powerful practice is to pay attention to your dreams.
Okay.
Dreams are a direct line to the unconscious. They can offer valuable insights into our fears, our desires, unresolved conflicts.
So don't just dismiss those weird dreams as random nonsense.
Exactly. There might be a message there trying to get through, Keep a dream journal by your bed and jot down those dreams as soon as you wake up, even if they don't make sense at first.
Okay.
Over time, you might start to notice patterns or themes that can offer clues about what's going on beneath the surface.
I love that it's like becoming our own dream detectives.
Yes.
Yes.
Another practice is to pay attention to your slips of the tongue, those moments when you say something you didn't intend to say.
Right.
Freud called these parapraxes, and he believed they were glimpses into the unconscious.
Like when you accidentally call your teacher mom.
Exactly. Or when you say something that seems completely out of character, or when you forget someone's name, even though you know it.
Right.
These seemingly insignificant slips can actually reveal a lot about what's going on in our unconscious minds.
It's like our unconscious is always trying to communicate with us, even if we're not always listening.
It is.
So the key is to just start paying attention.
Yes. Become more aware of those subtle signs and signals.
And as we become more attuned to our inner world, we start to notice those patterns, those defenses, those transferences playing out in our own lives.
Exactly. It's like we've been given this incredible toolkit for understanding ourselves and our relationships on a deeper level.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to use those tools to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep growing.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
I'm so glad.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the power and the potential of psychoanalytic psychotherapy.
Me too.
And even though it can be a long and challenging process, the rewards seem well worth the effort.
I think so too.
Sure.
It's a journey that can lead to, profound insights, deeper connections, and ultimately a more fulfilling life. And if our listeners are intrigued by what they've heard today, I highly recommend checking out Alessandra Lemma's book.
Yeah, it's a great book.
It's a fantastic starting point for further exploration.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of the unconscious. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep growing. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.